Welcome agents, today I've got a think piece video which you can all get involved in down in the comments. With title update 3.0 coming out in 11 days or 10 days as of me making this video, what's one thing you would add, change or remove when this update goes live? Now there is no better time than now to have your say, whether it be PvE or PvP related. Anything at all, I don't mind. With that said, I like to pass on your feedback to the devs, so please make it constructive, and whilst you're down there, maybe you could hit the like button and subscribe for dedicated Division content. Let's get to it. With the PTS inbound this coming week, I put the question to you guys on my community post and wanted to share and talk about some suggestions and add my own. Now, title update 3.0 is going to change some aspects of the game significantly. I imagine like armor and skill power, after devs confirmed this in the last state of the game and subsequent community post. The PTS will be going live this Wednesday the 17th, so we have some time for the devs to try and implement the changes you want, and this is your chance to do it. So let's take a look at what you guys had to say. Okay, so the first comment we had was from Mike Butcher, who said, "The number one thing for me is fix the Dark Zone. I want the DZ from the Division 1. No normalization, no toggle rogue, not so many damn bots. And second, a buff to skill power and health armor to make skill and tank builds viable." So I'd have to agree with Mike on this, but I would like to point out that the occupied DZ is basically what we had in the Division, except it doesn't work like it should. Now, I could make a whole video on the occupied DZ, but the main issues are any build will work because the time to kill is so low, meaning optimized builds basically don't matter, making it more of a COD type experience than a RPG experience. In fact, the time to kill in the occupied DZ is lower than that of Black Ops 4 PvP. Now second, there's no rogue system, meaning there's no reward for actually being in the occupied Dark Zone. All the moments you had from the Division with manhunts are just completely gone, and I'll just leave that there because I could go on forever. The second point from Mike about skill power and armor is something the devs should be addressing, so we'll have to wait and see what changes they will make. My guess is the devs will overtune the armor and skill power as they normally do with most things. They kind of go too far one way, meaning that tank skill builds will actually probably become the meta after the update, which is not that long away. Next up, and OP Kingsman 72 said, "Bring the recalibration station or system back from the Division 1 and restore DZ back to normal and make it hard and unforgiving." So I touched upon the DZ in my last comment, so I won't talk about that here, but what I wanted to discuss was the recalibration station, and this again is another topic that I could make a whole new video about. Now, a lot of people seem to prefer the original recalibration station from the Division. Well, most people that speak out about it anyway. And I think I do as well. Which is strange because when they actually announced the change to the recalibration station, I thought it would be a better system. I guess like a lot of things though, what sounds good on paper may not actually transition to be good in game. Now there's two main reasons I'm not a fan of the recalibration station. One, recalibrating the stat you want from one piece of gear to another is fine, but there's no way to maximize that stat, unlike the Division recalibration station, which allowed you to sort of invest Division tech and credits to maximize those stats, thus increasing your gear score, and again that's something we'll get onto. This lack of optimization within the game means it's all RNG, and the odds are astronomical that you get the right piece of gear with the right attribute that is also at the max roll. In fact, I don't think I have any piece of gear that's had that. Second, I don't understand why the stats are capped when you transfer them over. Now understand that if you have gloves with one attribute, let's say 11% LMG damage, and you want to transfer from one to another pair of gloves which has two attributes like health and rifle damage, I understand that you can't then put 11% LMG damage on those, because when you have two attributes there, one of the attributes is to basically, they're lowered to prevent them from being overpowered. So you might have, say, 6% rifle damage and then 3,000 health. It would overpower that particular piece of gear if you were then to be able to put 12% rifle damage. So they cut it in half basically, so there is a cap, and I get that. But what I find is that sometimes it doesn't feel like that. It feels like I'm being capped, and there's just no real way to optimize the gear, and I hate that. I hate that I can't optimize gear. It feels like you're always sort of taking one step back when you transfer attributes. And there's a lot more wrong with the recalibration station, but again, probably for another video, we'll move on. Okay, so the last comment I want to pick before suggesting my own is from Amin Hassan, who said, "Remove normalization. My AR has 19k damage, or assault rifle has 19k damage, and when I play PvP it drops to 6.7k. Now, I've touched upon this subject before, as has a lot of people, but for anyone who didn't see that, let's just quickly talk about normalization. So, I'm going to disagree with this comment because I think normalization within conflict is a must, but the devs need to change how the normalization works. Now, does anyone ever remember the issues with normalization in The Division? Nope, me neither. And why is that? It's pretty simple actually. In The Division, normalization didn't reduce everything, but instead pushed everyone's stats to the maximum, meaning that if you invested all of your main stats into, say, firearms, you'd have a very strong DPS firearms build and likely no survivability. You would have a glass cannon build because all of your stats would be pushed to their maximum, pushing you further away from others who had invested in other things. Now, the same could be said for skill builds and tank builds within The Division 1. In The Division 2, however, and I really don't know why they did this, but they went the opposite direction, pushing everyone's stats closer to zero. There are a lot of problems with that. The two main ones I can think of are, one, the further you reduce everyone's stats, the closer everyone's builds sort of get, meaning that you lose a lot of the variety in builds that makes up an RPG game. An example would be, if I decide to, say, have a 45k damage and let's say 160k armor, then it's fair to say that I'm moving towards a DPS glass cannon build, right? Because I got low armor, high damage. What about if another person does the opposite and goes with, say, 20k damage but 300k armor? So they're clearly going for a tank build. You still with me? Good. So we've got two completely opposite builds, right? You're going into conflict. Now in The Division, the DPS build will be pushed even further towards that glass cannon build, and the tank build will be pushed even further towards being a tank. That's how it should work. In The Division 2, what happens is the damage on the DPS build gets reduced to 20k because of normalization, and the 300k armor on the tank build gets reduced to 160k armor because of normalization. So both builds become the same thing, aside from some unique talents, possibly. And it makes no sense. Plus, all that hard work you've put in to get the right attributes on the right gear makes no difference. Now, the devs, in my opinion, have to revert the normalization back to what it was in The Division. And I don't think that's a hard challenge for them. I'm not sure, I'm not a dev, but it makes sense to me that they would do this. And that way, build variety would actually become a thing instead of everyone doing the same damage, having the same armor, because of how normalization currently works in those modes. And ultimately it would bring back build variety. It would still be balanced because everyone's stats being pushed to the maximum. So you could simply get the worst piece of gear, but as long as it's got, with the lowest rolls, but as long as it's got the rolls you want, it wouldn't matter. They would be maximized. And that's how the Division 1 worked. I'm pretty sure you guys are familiar with that. Now I hope that makes sense, and I'm pretty sure you'd all agree with me on this one. And even if you don't care about PvP, it still needs to be in there. It's very important, and I hope the devs are listening. Okay, so thank you to everyone for actually commenting on my community post. Now I want to go over the one thing I would add, remove or change for Title Update 3.0, and two of them I covered in this video, and that was Normalization and the Recalibration Station. But if I could only change one thing, it would be how the gear score is currently calculated. Now I talked about gear score in a previous video, and it literally means nothing in the game right now. It means absolutely nothing. What is the point of it? Now, having a gear score of, say, 515, does that mean that your build is more optimized than someone with a gear score of, say, 450? No. All it says is that you have recalibrated a piece of gear with a 500 gear score, and that's it. If you took a piece of gear with, say, 5% weapon damage on, and changed that for, say, 3% weapon damage, because why not? Your gear score would increase. Now, how does that make any sense? Gear score, again, should work like the Division and actually mean something. It should represent how optimized your build is. Otherwise, I just don't see the point. And it's funny how you needed a gear score or a minimum gear score to play strongholds, like Tidal Basin was 425. And yet my 415 gear score build was stronger than my 447 gear score build that I used for Tidal Basin. And it's clear the devs wanted gear score to represent your player power. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had minimum requirements for these strongholds. But it is absolutely backwards. If I have 5% weapon damage on a 500 gear score chest piece, for example, and I decide to recalibrate and put 3% weapon damage on there instead because I'm having a mad moment, my gear score should be lowered, not put up 15 levels. Now I hope the devs really consider what gear score means in the game. If it does in fact mean nothing and they want that, then just stop forcing players to meet minimum requirements on certain activities. Instead, allow us to play anything with any gear score as long as you're in the correct world tier. Like I said before, I've got builds currently at 450 that are much stronger than any build I can make at 500. It makes no sense. So to summarise, the devs have really made some good progress from the Division in the Division 2. But there are some really good things from the first game, like how Normalization works, the Recalibration Station, the Dark Zones and more. There's a lot of stuff that the Division 2 would really benefit from. I think it's clear to me now that the devs wanted to step away from everything in the first game. But actually, the Division 2 needs to have both new and old things to give us the best experience. I do hope you all enjoyed today's video and left your comments down below. Until the next one, Epic out.